At the time of the story, I was 12 years old, but I remember in full detail the worst day of my life. When gloomy shadows drowned in darkness, the trailing leaves of the trees whispered ominous secrets in the wind of the dark night. My defenseless spirit, touched by a vague anxiety, felt a strange heavy jolt at the sight of a pitch-black car pulling up. It was strange that the taxi had come unexpectedly early, as if some ancient shadow had driven it to the fateful moment. But I got into the car and noticed that the driver was very silent, his face covered by a hood and black glasses. During the journey, he was in a nervous hurry and wanted to get me to the place as soon as possible, so he took a different, more deserted, dark and narrow road without traffic lights. During the journey, I found that I started receiving notifications on my phone all at once. With horror in my eyes, I saw that the taxi driver had not waited for me and would be leaving soon if I didn't get out. I tried to open the doors with fear, but they were locked. The street was empty, with only dark trees slowly flickering outside the windows. My chest constricted with fear, and my heart pounded frantically. The driver, like a nightmare incarnate, continued to scrutinize me through the reflection of the rear-view mirror. His black glasses seemed like two bottomless pits, swallowing up light and life. We raced down unknown roads, twisting and turning as if playing a treacherous maze. The notification beeps on my phone grew louder and louder, reminding me of the reality of the moment, of the urgency to act. But my hand wouldn't listen, shaking with fear and powerlessness. When he stopped the car in a dark and deserted place, all my worst fears began to become reality. I could feel the menace lingering in the air, and his black glasses reflected my terror. "What's going on?" I mumbled, trying to collect my mind and figure out what was going on. That's when the driver suddenly pulled off his hood and exposed his face. His eyes were as red as the devil's, and the smile on his face was so insidious that goosebumps ran all over my body. He began to slowly rise from behind the wheel, as if clearing his mind of all fears. Then I felt the whole world around me distort, as if reality began to dissolve, leaving only emptiness and fear. My heart was racing and fear paralyzed every cell in my body. Suddenly, a menacing stranger with a shiny object in his hand stepped out of the shadows. He approached me, and I recognized in his hand a knife with a bleeding blade. I realized that time was working against me and my life hung in the balance. Through tears and fear, I shook myself away from this horror with all my might and rushed towards the door. With agonizing effort, I broke the glass and rushed outside and began to run further and further away, forcefully fighting off the terrifying ghosts that haunted me. I heard their sinister laughter and voices, but I kept running until I reached a lighted street, where people enveloped me, rescuing me from this nightmarish situation. Since then, I have never been able to forget that terrible day and the lesson of the importance of caution and vigilance, especially when lives are at stake. That day I moved into my late grandfather's house. I wanted to live in it for a while, and after a few days I wanted to sell it and use the money to buy a house in a place where I wanted to live, because I didn't want to live with my parents anymore, because our relationship was not very good. When I got to the house, I filled the chest of drawers and the wardrobe, and then I cooked dinner. Going into the living room, I felt that the atmosphere of the house had become gloomy, so I decided to go outside to walk and talk to the neighbors. A little way down the street on a bench, I saw a grandmother whom I had never met or seen before living in the house. I approached her to find out more about her. She looked very old and frowning. Without listening to me, looking down, she told me a phrase. "They're watching you, and you can forget about the inheritance with incomprehension." Turning round, I saw that in the old and alienated house, which I had never noticed before. Rushing back, I noticed to my horror that from almost every window dark figures were looking at me with their blazing eyes. Their blazing eyes, which glittered in the gloom, seemed to me an eerie omen. I left that gloomy courtyard and rushed further down the street, hoping to rid myself of the feeling of dread that had seized me. But every step I took seemed heavier and heavier, as if I were being pulled back to the house I had come from to get answers to my questions. Under the muffled hum of the air, I noticed that the shadows around me had grown longer and unmoving. After a few minutes, I found myself at a dead end surrounded by the high walls of an ancient cemetery. When I looked round, I saw them again, those black figures with blazing eyes. They gave me a terror that words could not convey as soon as I looked at their slowly approaching figures. I realized that they weren't just following me, they were stalking me.my. Fear reached a point of critical mass when one of the figures stepped out of the shadows and stepped towards me, exposing its face. It was the face of the grandmother I had seen earlier, but now it was distorted with terror and anger. She hissed in my ear, "You are ours now. You will be our eternal companion in the world of shadows." I screamed in despair, but no one's ears heard my scream. A dark curse hovered in the air, creating an atmosphere of hopelessness. I felt time slowing down, as if space itself was trying to take me in its embrace. The graves began to glow brighter and brighter. The shadows began to take shape, breaking out of their ghostly captivity and surrounding me on all sides. I felt cold fingers silently touching my skin, penetrating me to my heart. Whispers from the past rang in my head, promises of immortality in exchange for my consciousness. But I didn't give up. By sheer force of will, I gathered the rest of my strength and decided to fight to the end, refusing this ominous exchange. I began to slowly retreat, step by step, from my grandmother and her cursed allies, feeling their sinister gaze on me. Suddenly, like a flash of light in the darkness, I saw a faint glow at the end of the narrow passage between the graves. Without a second thought, I rushed there, feeling an unprecedented sense of hope. With every step, my heart beat more and more strongly, filling me with determination to overcome this terrible obstacle. The road to the light was difficult, testing me more than ever before. I could still see those dark figures in the distance, but the further I ran away from the trap, the less I saw of them. But at last, when I got out, I found myself in a clearing where I could see people in front of me, and the dark figures disappeared. When I got back to my house, I didn't see my grandmother on the bench, and when I went inside, I noticed that my clothes were no longer neatly folded, and the wardrobe door was slightly ajar. I lived alone. I locked the door. No one could do that. It made me feel even more creepy, and I wanted to leave the place as soon as possible. I was completely packed and left immediately within 30 minutes. That night, I had to sleep in the car. When I was done, I went back to my parents' house and told them what had happened. They became more understanding and rainbow. That day struck me. This story happened to me when I was in 5th grade, when I was playing football abandoned by my friends in the playground on my first day off. While playing football, I accidentally kicked the ball too hard and it flew off the court, rolling onto the road. Time stood still and my gaze was drawn to a strange man who suddenly appeared and picked up the ball, stashing it in his dingy bag. The man, smiling tensely, invited me into his home, claiming the ball was damaged and he would help repair and inflate it. The man spoke nervously, stuttered, and walked incredibly fast. It was almost hard to keep up with him. Along the way, he asked questions such as what sport I played, what we were going over in class. The journey took about 10 minutes. When we reached his house, we were in a different neighborhood. His house looked ordinary. As I recall, he took me inside, closed the door, and locked it. It was dark because all the curtains were closed and it felt like night, and the only light was a dim lamp. Looking inside the man's bag, I noticed that the ball was fully inflated and there was no damage to it at all. Being in the house, I was starting to get nervous and regretted entering the house. The man silently went into another room and I did the only thing I could think of. I went into the kitchen and found a phone hanging on the wall. I took it off and dialed 911. The first thing I said when they answered was a whisper, "Please come to this house. I have been kidnapped." I hid the phone under a towel in the corner of the room, and 911 was still on the line. I hurried to where the man had left me when his footsteps were heard. He then called out to me and told me to come downstairs. Then there was a pause, and he repeated the phrase, and when I didn't respond, he walked up the stairs. When he came up to me, I was so scared that I didn't hate myself for getting into this situation and not being wise. I asked in a very scared voice, "Can I go?" And I remember his face changed, his fake smile disappeared, and he walked towards me until he got very close to aggressively grab my wrist and started pulling me towards the basement. I was screaming loudly and crying, and he was shouting at me, "I will allow it, and you will go if you behave." After listening to him, I walked down the stairs. The door behind me slammed shut and locked. I walked completely down the stairs into this dingy basement with a concrete floor. I could hear his long and heavy footsteps upstairs. I heard the footsteps coming towards me, and at that moment he opened the cellar door and asked if I was hungry. I said no. I didn't want him to go to the kitchen, and seeing the missing phone, he closed the door and would lock it again. I sat waiting with my heart in my throat, and then I heard the doorbell ring 3 times, followed by the sound of banging, which was definitely done by the police. After a while, I heard a clap, and then some heavy footsteps and some screaming voices. I started shouting for help as loud as I could. The door was unlocked, and the policeman on the other side grabbed me and dragged me outside. There were at least 2 cars there. I had to tell everything to the 2 policemen outside while we waited for my parents to show up. The handcuffed man was taken outside and put in a police car, and that was the last time I saw him. When my parents arrived, they stared. After that incident, my mother went to counseling with me for a few months. Without calling the police before he actually threw me in the basement, I know for a fact that I would be dead right now. This was about 12 years ago, and this man probably could have gotten out of jail.